So today we're going to make a pencil cup organizer. This is an organizer I actually keep by my sewing machine. It has all my goodies in it. There's little pockets all the way around. And why it's called a pencil cup organizer is because it just goes around. This is a little 5-ounce plastic cup. That's what it looks like flat. And I'm going to show you how to measure your cups to make sure that your piece fits the cup you buy. I've also ordered some of these on Amazon. I will put a link below for those cups. They're perfect for this. They're just inexpensive but plastic, so they're a little more durable than like a Soho cup. So first, to measure for our pencil holder, you take measure in your cup. To measure the length of your organizer, you look for the widest part of your cup, take the tape measure, and measure around that part to get the circumference. Mine is just 12 inches. So I'm going to cut this 12 inches in that direction. To get the height of my piece, I'm going to take a tape measure and measure the height of my cup, which is 4.5, and I'm going to double it. So it'll be 4.5 times 2 is 9. So I need to cut my pieces 9 inches by 12 inches. And I'm going to cut 2 for the body, 1 for the back, 1 for the front, and 1 piece of batting to measure 9 by 12. Then for the pockets, because this is 4.5, let's start from the bottom. You can decide how high up you want your pockets to go. This one, the pockets only go to 3 inches. You could go up to 4 inches. You could do 3.5. So you can decide how deep you want to make these pockets. But for this one, we're going to do a 3-inch height. And because it's doubled, you're going to take 3 times 2 and get 6 inches by the 6 inches for your width. Then we have all these little pleats in here. We know we need at least 12 inches, and then we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pleats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 inches. So this is 12 plus 5 is 17. And then I'm going to add a little slush. So I'm going to actually cut it at 19 inches. So for the pockets, for this size cup, it's going to be 6 inches by 19 inches. I can always trim it smaller, but I can't make it longer easily. You can, but it's a little more complicated. I'm going to get those cut, and then I'll show you the pieces. So once we've got our cup measured, we've got our pieces cut. So what you need is 2 9 by 12 pieces of fabric for the body, and you're going to layer those with a piece of batting the same size. And then we're going to move on to that for our first step. So 2 pieces of fabric and batting, 9 by 12. For the pockets, I cut a 19 by 6 inch piece that we're going to end up folding in half. To bind the edges, we are going to use 2.5 strips. 2.5 strips. You need 1.5 strips that each measure 2.5 inches. We will sew these together to make one long piece to bind it. And then for the ties on the pencil cup organizer, I'm using 3/8 inch black gross grain ribbon. I cut 4 pieces that are 8 inches long. So those are your supplies that you'll need to make the cup. So the first step is to layer 1 piece of fabric right side down, wrong side up, piece of batting, and then top fabric wrong side down, right side up. So you have right sides on both sides. And you can quilt this however you desire. For me, I am going to quilt it with vertical lines. And you can use a chalk pencil or iron out pencil, it doesn't matter, something that will disappear in case you don't sew on the lines. And you can see on this one, I did the ridges, and actually I feel like it helps the cup have some more body. So I'm going to do the same thing here. And so before I quilt that, I'm going to take a ruler, and I'm going to use the 1-inch mark on the ruler, and I'm just going to mark 1-inch lines all the way across, and then we'll go over to the machine, and I'm just going to quilt the lines using a walking foot. Anytime you're using batting with cotton and it's thicker, you're going to want to use a walking foot. It just makes the piece go through your machine a lot easier. Alright, so we're over here with the machine. I've got my piece all layered up and marked, and I'm going to use a walking foot. If you aren't familiar with this, this is what a walking foot looks like. Every machine, you can usually buy one if it's not brand specific like my Bernina. There's universal walking foot for other machines. But what the walking foot is it gives you feed dogs on top. These are feed dogs on the bottom. And that way the material is being pulled through evenly. Usually use a walking foot when your piece is thicker than just a one layer of cotton. If anytime you feel like you're getting stuff puckering and it doesn't want to grab it, you pull out your walking foot. I use it for quilting. I use it on suede, leather, flannel. Anytime I'm sewing something thicker than regular cotton, I usually will pull out my walking foot. So we're just going to quilt our lines, and the walking foot will go straight. I marked them so they're even. I'm going to go down, loop, come down. I'm just going to serpentine through the whole piece. It'll just take a second. Okay, we're all quilted. And you see by doing that back and forth, I didn't have to break my threads every time. So we're going to go ahead and move over to the cutting table to cut and taper this top edge. First we'll trim it up, then we're going to top and taper. We're going to go over to the cutting table, we'll square this up, and then I'm going to show you how to measure the top and sides so that we can then taper this end. It'll make it go in the cup easier. So now I have all my lines quilted on here. You can see we've got it done. Now we're ready to taper the corners. And so for mine, the taper is, it's halfway is 4.5. I'm gonna go up a 1/2 inch. So I'm gonna mark it at the 4 inch on this side. Let's get a ruler here. So 4 inches on this side. And I'm going to taper in 1.5 inches here, so I'm going to put a mark there and a mark there. Then you take the ruler and you align the edge of the ruler on the 2 marks, and that's what we're going to cut away for our taper. And this just makes it easier to get it inside the cup. So this is the inside of your organizer. So there's that one, and then the same thing on this side. There we go. So now those are tapered. So the body of this is done. We are going to make some marks along the bottom edge. We are first going to find our center point, which is 6 inches. So I'm going to make a mark there, and then our quarter points, which is 3 inches and 9 inches. And this is going to help us align our pockets. So 1, 2, 3 marks. So the next step is to make our pockets. So I have my strip that's 19 by 6, and we're going to fold it in half lengthwise, and I'm going to go over to the iron and press it. Then I'm going to fold it in half this way and fold it into quarters, and I will press all of this. This will give us our crease line, so it makes it easier to line up our pockets. Alright, so now I have a crease line at the center, at this pocket seam, and this pocket seam. We got 1, 2, 3, 4 pockets. So 1, 2, 3, 4 segments. So we need to get some pins. And the first thing you do is you pin the pocket to the body on the right, and then on the left. Then we're going to take the center crease and pin that, aligning it with the center line at the bottom here. So the center crease with this bottom center line. And then the quarter line goes on the 3 inches. And then the other quarter line goes on the 9-inch mark. Then we need to pleat the pockets. So that's what all this ripply stuff is going to be. The first pleat is over here, and we're going to put a binding around here. So the first pleat, actually, it's about 1/4 inch. You fold over. So so you can see it. That's the pleat, but you want to make sure you're at least 1/4 inch away from this edge, because that edge is going to have binding on it and you don't want to catch the edge of your pocket. So once you get that in place, and you can use straight pins or wonder clips. I'll show you wonder clips at the bottom here. So once I get my pleat in place, I'm just clipping it to hold it in place till we get to the sewing machine. Now this other pin, this is the center line between this pocket and this pocket. So the other pleat goes up to the pin, but not past it. And there's our first pocket. And I'm going to clip that. There's pocket number 1. I'm going to repeat the same thing on this side. I always find it easier to do the pockets, this one, this one, this one, this one, versus just working my way down. That way I know they're fairly even from side to side. But honestly, it doesn't probably matter. Sometimes I just get it in my head, that's how it's got to be done, and I don't change my ways. Alright, now we have this other pocket. And you'll notice I don't have any hard or fast measurements for this. I'm just pleating it how it wants to pleat. The measurements was adding that slush to the 12 inches at the very beginning when we were figuring out our math. So now this one, I just sort of make the pleat on both sides at the same time so I can get it even. And like this pleat is way fatter than this one, so I'm going to kind of roll this over and take some away. So you just sort of futz. There we go. Gotta get my fingers out of the way. And then we've got our last pocket, same thing. Okay, so now we have all our pockets made. I'm going to just hold it up here so you can see what it looks like. Now we need to tack all these down. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to sew along the side, across the bottom of all of these. That'll hold our pleats in place, and then up this side. Then we're going to come back and we'll go through in between each pocket. So let's go over to the sewing machine and get these sewn down. Alright, so we're over here at the machine. We're ready to anchor our pleated pockets down. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to start on this side, go down the side, and I'm only going to use like an 1/8 inch seam allowance. I'm not trying to get a 1/4 inch. I don't want to have to fight with trying to get my binding to cover my sewing. So about 1/8 of an inch in, all the way down the side, across the bottom, and then up that side. Then we'll come back in and do in between the pleats. And again, still using my walking foot. You don't want to sew over your pins, so you'll pull the pins out as you go. Alright, so now that I have all my pleats being held in place, now we're going to go down the centers. And when you get to the end, it is really important to reverse stitch to anchor that, because that's where all this pocket pulling is going to happen. So you want to make sure that you anchor that down. So we're going to start over here first. Get rid of all these threads hanging off. I don't know about you, they drive me crazy. All right. So this one, I'm going to put the metal of the walking foot right on the pleat, because I don't want to go on the pleat. So we're going to go a couple stitches, blankets or back stitch it, and go down. And then stop. And then again, away from, you don't want to sew the pleats down or the pockets don't work, but you want to go in between. All right, all our pockets are sewn down. We are ready to start the next step. So here it is with the pockets all sewn. Now we need to do the binding and add the ribbons on. So the ribbons go, we still need 4 more under quips. The ribbons go about a 1/2 inch from the bottom. There's one on that side and one on this side. And you'll see it's not rocket science. You don't have to measure, you just eyeball it. Now the other ribbons, there's this point here where the curve comes to the straight. You want the ribbon a 1/2 inch below that point. And again, just approximate. Now when we sew our binding on, we'll catch the ribbon in the seam. And then these guys, we're going to clip them in the middle here to keep them out of our way, so they don't get caught in the seams while we're sewing, or there's nothing worse than getting it done, turning it, and finding a ribbon caught in the seam. So those are all secure. So let's go over to the machine and we will get the binding on this and we will be done. All right, so here we are going to sew our binding strips together. Again, we're going to put them right sides together and then add a right angle to each other. And we're going to sew from the top upper left corner to lower right corner. You can switch your foot out to your regular sewing foot. It'll make it a little easier, but I'm going to go ahead and use the walking foot because I'm not going to change them. All right, so now that that is sewn, you clip your threads and you cut this, leaving a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So this is the sewing line. I'm cutting a 1/4 inch away. All right, now I have one continuous seam strip for my binding. You want to use a diagonal seam like this when you do binding, because if you do a straight seam, the next step is to fold this in half and you'll have this big bulky bulge here, where if you see here when I fold it in half, half the seam is here, half the seam is there. It's proportionally just positioned inside, and it won't cause a bulge on your binding. So the next step is to press this and then to press this down. And so I'm going to go do that, and then I'll come back and we'll bind this piece. So here's our binding all pressed and ready to go. And this is where the seam is. So this is the shorter end of it. I'm going to start with the shorter end so this seam does not end up at the bottom where I'm going to have to sew the two pieces together. So to do a binding on this, I am going to start on the bottom and I'm going to start sewing way over here. I'm going to sew up and around and across the top and back down, so that in the end I have the two tails at the bottom to join for the binding. So I will show you that step here in just a second. Let's go ahead and sew this on. And you always want to leave like a 6 to 8 inch tail so that you have enough to get it under the machine to sew them back together. So let's go ahead and bind this. Oh, and I'm sorry, we're going to sew on the wrong side first and then bring it to the front because I'm going to machine sew it down. If you're going to hand sew it, you would sew it onto the front and pull it to the back and hand sew it down. But I'm going to do it by machine, and so you'll see what that looks like. All right. So using a 1/4 inch seam allowance and a walking foot, I'm just going to go ahead and sew this. You stop a 1/4 inch from the edge and do a reverse. And you do a French fold in the corner, which means I'm taking the binding, let's get it all up here, and I'm going to fold it up like this. So I create a 45-degree angle, okay? And then I keep my thumb here and I bring the binding down and make sure that that fold is aligned with the raw edge. That is a French fold. And the straighter this is, the better your corner will be. So now that we have that in place, we're going to start right on the end. I'm going to remove this, but I'm holding the ribbon with pressure. So we're catching that ribbon. And I'm going to come up here. And as I get closer, we'll take this one out. Now there's that angled piece. All I'm going to do is angle it gently. I'm not going to do a fold or anything at that point. And you're going to have a pucker there, and that's okay. We will catch it on the other side. All right. Now when we get up to the corner, we're going to do another fold, stopping a 1/4 inch from the end, reverse. Get rid of your threads. Now we're going to do another French fold, but this is not a 90 degrees, so it's not going to be, it's going to be more like a 60 degree. See what that looks like? Okay. Stop at the 1/4 inch, reverse. Okay, now we're going to do our last French fold. And we're really not going to sew very far. I just need to anchor this guy down. Okay, and that's as far as we're going to stitch right now because we need to sew these two ends together. So the first thing we're going to do is you can see that this tail is way longer than this. So I'm just going to trim it to get rid of it. We don't need all that. It's like it's not enough for one strip, but just too much. You need to have a 1 1/2 or 1 1/4, I guess. All right, so now we need to put these two tails together to finish our binding. And how we're going to do that is we're going to use a little cutting mat, a 28mm rotary cutter, and this is our binding ruler. This is the 2 1/2 inch, and we also make one for 2 1/4 inch. All the math is in the ruler, so you do need the right ruler for the size binding you're using. There are a couple videos on our YouTube channel, I'll link them below, on how to use the binding rulers, but I'm going to walk through it here as well. Alright, so the first thing you need to do is we're going to have the seam about here. So this is also too long. I'm just going to get rid of some of that. So the first thing we do is we open up the bottom tail, lay it on my mat. The ruler says readable side always up. So we're going to put the ruler on the binding, aligning the top and the side and the bottom. And we're going to go ahead and cut this angle. This is a 45-degree angle. And I obviously need a new blade. Then to do the top half, we open up the top. And this is much easier on a bigger quilt, believe it or not. Smaller is harder. So, and then we lay this bottom tail that we already cut into the top tail. And we're going to put a straight pin in the top tail where that bottom tail meets it. Okay, so there's the bottom tail. It's meeting the top tail, and we just put a pin there. Then we flip this guy open. And we are going to back this up a little, so I have some room to work. Alright. Now we have our straight pin, and our ruler has a groove cut in the ruler. The groove locks right over that pin, so that it doesn't slide anywhere. That's what makes our binding ruler the best. You can align the top edge of the ruler with the binding, the bottom with the binding, and then we're going to cut, make sure I have some room here. I'm going to cut this, okay? The math is between here and here, so we need to cut that first, then you pull the pin out, and then you can go ahead and cut your second angle. Okay, now we're done with all of that. Alright, so sew the two ends together. We open up the bottom tail, open up the top tail. You just align the two pieces and just sew them together. Alright, now we have our nice 1/4 inch seam, and look at that. It just lays down flat. You can take it over to the iron and press it, but I just find finger pressing it, that seam down, it helps. And that's just because I was trying to use the walking foot and it slipped on me. It'll be fine. It's on the inside of my binding. Alright, now we're going to keep those clipped in the middle, and now we're going to bring this binding around to the front. And now we need to stitch it down on the front to finish it, and then we will be all done with our pencil cup. Alright, so we are ready to tack down our binding on the finished edge. And how I do it is I use invisible thread. I use Aurifil invisible thread. I use it in my bobbin and in my top thread. And I don't have any issues. The Aurifil is my favorite. YLI is my second favorite. So you can find either of those is great. And then I'm going to use a blind hem stitch. And I will show you that after I finish this. I'll flip over to the stitches. But a blind hem stitch goes like this, straight, V, straight, V. The straight is going into here, the V is going to go into my binding. So if you don't want to use invisible thread, you want to use a thread that matches your binding, not your piece, because that's where the thread is going to show the most. I usually will start on a nice straight area. I turn the stitch width and stitch length both down to 1.25. So it's a nice small stitch that disappears. And we're going to start here. We'll work to the corner. We're going to fold the corner up. It'll catch the ribbons. And then once we're all done, the whole piece is done. So let's get started. Oh, and if you have a needle position, put it to the center. That makes it a little easier. All right, so we're gonna start sewing that over. Then when we get to the corner, we're going to create a 45-degree angle here, a nice clean angle. And then I'm going to turn, stitch down the angle, and then reverse stitch back up. I am not breaking the thread. And then I'm gonna do the same here. Make sure you don't stitch your pocket edge down. And as you're pulling it around to the front, you want to make sure that you're looking at it and you're pulling it evenly, so you don't just like pull it too far and get it to buckle. So just a gentle, it should have your fabric in the binding, but you shouldn't have a lot of space there. And then when we come up to the angle, we're just going to have a little bit there, and we're just going to ease it in. There we go. And then when we get up here again, it's a funky angle, so it's not going to be a 45. So you just sort of roll it with your finger until it looks nice. Then go back out, go back in. There you go. And that's actually how I bind all my quilts as well, from the back, and then use the blind hem stitch for the front. So that's all bound. So let me show you the stitch we were talking about. So on my machine, it's that one. That's what it looks like. It's stitch number 3 on my machine, but this is a blind hem stitch. Most machines have that stitch, so you can just look for the stitch. And then over here you'll see my stitch length is at 1 1/4. My stitch width is at 1 1/4. I have my needle down, and there's the stitch showing up. So that is how you do a blind hem stitch with invisible thread, or like I said, if you want to match your piece, just match to the binding, not to the background. So let's get a close-up here so you can see what it looks like. All right, so we have it all bound. And we're going to unclip our ribbons, and we're going to put our pencil cup together. So how it goes together is you fold it, you take your cup, and you slide it over the edge of your cup. And you want to get it in there, so it's nice and even around the bottom. And then you just tie your ribbons. One of my first part-time jobs when I was a teenager was actually working for a high-end shoe store. And I had to tie all the sneakers for the displays. It was my calling. So anyway, just tie it on the cup like this. However you want to tie your bow is fine with me. You could do Velcro straps or snaps or some buttons. You can do something else, but the ribbons are just quick and easy and they get it on the cup quickly. So there's our cup already, and I'm going to fill it up because this goes by my sewing machine. So I have in there my zippy ripper. I have a nice pair of fabric scissors. I have my little Ginger blunt tips for quilting. You use blunt tips so you don't snip your quilt on accident. And I just have a pair of cheapy scissors for cutting everything but fabric. I have a bunny pinwheel because, you know, everybody needs a bunny pinwheel. I don't know why. It just sticks in the cup. It's cute. I have some small rulers. This ruler has a 1/4 inch guide on it, so I can stick a needle through there and it'll be a 1/4 inch. So if I need to set the 1/4 inch on my sewing machine with our Q2 sewing edge, I can use that. I have a nail file, tweezers for my serger, assorted pens and pencils for writing. I have 2 Frixion pens for marking fabric. These are the ones that iron away. I have my oh so trusty purple thing and my bobkin. Bobkin is something you can use to pull ribbons and elastic through things. And then on the outside I have my cleaning tools. So I have my lint brush. I use these little freebie mascara brushes from Sephora or Ulta, and I use these to clean in my machine. They're just, you know, usually you can just ask for one, they'll give you one. I have a little tiny eyeliner brush, same thing. It's just tiny enough to get into things I need to clean. I have my machine oil, and I have a trusty little screwdriver. So that is my cup organizer and what I put in it. I would love to hear down below in the comments what you've put in your cup organizer and if you've had fun making this. And let me know if you like these free follow along videos instead of having like a quilt pattern and stuff. So I'd appreciate to hear that too. I hope you've enjoyed our pencil cup tutorial. And if you have, make sure you like and subscribe below, and thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, make sure you like and subscribe below. You can find the Whimsical Workshop on our website, thewhimsicalworkshop.com, and that has all links to all of our other social media platforms. Thanks for joining us.